Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. I am Nate Rose, and today you guys are here to hear a talk about decentralized autonomous organizations, specifically building global entities for virtual communities. So just a quick intro and also level setting. This is a beginner talk, and hopefully within future Apexes we'll have more in-depth talks about how we could build decentralized autonomous organizations in the future on XRPL Ledger. So an intro about myself. I am a senior data engineer at Ripple Labs. I work specifically on data infrastructure and building the core data components that powers our applied science products like Liquidity Hub.
And I'm Mark Scott, and I'm a senior staff partner engineer here at Ripple as well. And my role specifically is onboarding our partners, whether it's individual partners or channel partners, onto RippleNet to leverage our payments products, right? So ODL, Liquidity Hub, and any of the payments products that we have. So good to be here to share some of the research that we've done with you guys.
Yep, so what we do outside of work is that we're actively involved in DAOs over the past 2.5 years. So by show of hands, how many know what a DAO is, a decentralized autonomous organization? Well, great. Keep your hands up if you are a part of a DAO. Ooh. Yeah. That's cool, that's fine. So for my fellow DAOist, I think we're gonna make that a term now, DAOist.
Right? Pun intended.
Yeah. So again, this is a beginner. We need a level set. This hasn't been done before at Apex, so we want to make sure, especially with the new feature sets that are currently in the queue to be amended to the ledger, we want to make sure that we're level setting on how we think about decentralized autonomous organizations. So for this talk, we actually start with this idea of a virtual community, and it's pretty straightforward. The virtual community could be identified or be accelerated by the fact that we've been remote over the past 2 years. And the internet has actually allowed us to connect in different ways and different mechanisms over the past 15 to 20 to 25 years, right? So we're seeing web-based, internet-based communities being built. We have 3 examples here that all have different initiatives that are at the core foundation of how they were built. So for one example, we have Black Lives Matter. So that's Alicia Garza and Patrisse Cullors. They did a Facebook message after the verdict of the Trayvon Martin case back in 2012, and they put the hashtag Black Lives Matter. From that, they were able to create a global 501c3 nonprofit organization that manages millions that gets distributed to assisting in the legal funds for fighting malicious law enforcement activities, right? Or we have Wall Street Bets, which could be just a cohort. It's a Reddit group, right? So with this cohort, we have individuals who may be coming from hedge funds, who may be coming from investment clubs that are based in university, who are finding each other, and maybe they're investing in meme stocks, or they're investing in actual research initiatives that are for trading. And then for this last example, since this is a developer conference, this is something that we're well familiar with. It's an open source initiative. Open source has been available for us for the past 30, 40 years, and open source has been accelerated by, for example, I've been a part of the Cloud Native Foundation during my previous work at Microsoft, and that has been a fundamental catalyst for enabling containers and orchestration like Kubernetes in the use of cloud infrastructure use cases. But trust on the internet is difficult. To achieve this, we need to be able to trust each other, whether it's through some sort of virtualization, some sort of paradigm, and we're using different social media networks like Twitter, like Discord, like Blind, and Clubhouse to be able to identify how do we build trust relationships between each other to build entities, build organizations. So there is, from the example that I just mentioned, there's some discrepancies with something like Black Lives Matter where they were under scrutiny when it came to like their legal, their financial transactions, right? There's also additional use cases where we find like humanitarian organizations coming to instances where they have been penetrated or breached by some sort of IT vulnerability, so they're not able to produce that. And then also open source is what powers Web3. So how do we organize in a fiat hierarchical organization? We're building these communities that are public and available. And if we want to take it a next step forward into producing something like an entity that has the ability to make decisions around financial assets, digital assets, how does that come about organically? How do we provide transparency to our organization? So in the case of BLM, those transactions, what are we spending on, right? How are we making sure that we're upholding our initiative, our mission, that aligns to the local jurisdiction of a 501c3 based in the US? And can we incentivize early adopters, early members who are really providing that impact, who are making the tasks and executing on the tasks so that we're able to move from a community to an actual organization that's able to uphold the objectives and goals that we're trying to achieve. So how do you build trust in an internet-based community? This is something that we've known for the past 10 years now. It's, we're building that right now on the ledger. So web-based native organizations, blockchains were built to be trustless. So the relationships, we can start to formulate and build them organically on-chain, right? So the way we define decentralized autonomous organization is a little bit different from maybe the capitalistic definition that you may be used to. Decentralized meaning, hey, we have this no central leadership, decisions are made in a bottom way, but we're able to transparently identify how centralization is being constructed within our organization. Autonomous, meaning that the ideas takes a life of its own and is able to incentivize others to make itself happen. So how do we leverage smart contracts, these conditionals that abide us or provide the ruling and policies within our organization so that we have guardrails to execute? And finally, organization, that's self-explanatory. It can have its own rules, such as how to manage its own funds. What is the initiative? What is the goal that we can execute? Sometimes these organizations can be ephemeral, right? We have executed, we completed our goal. Now we can go ahead and deprecate this organization to move on to a next task. So this is actually a breakdown of how DAOs have being used in like different use cases. I think you're most familiar with ownership models where you have like shared ownership. In the case of like Links DAOs, which is a DAO for golf courses with shared ownership. There's also fractionalized ownership where you have like Pleaser DAO, which is achieving to collect artists' digital art through non-fungible tokens. There's also DAOs, and I come from an academic background with research. How do we promote the revision of scientific literature so that the peer review is able to be incentivized against different institutions or the individuals who are conducting that peer review, right? There's creative DAOs, so providing ownership and transparent contractual transactions for artists. How do we provide royalties for the art that they're producing, whether it is through a musician or through some other form? And then finally, civic DAOs is another example of a novel use case for decentralized or autonomous organizations where you could fund civic infrastructure and projects to collaborate on for resource spending. One example of that is actually the Brooklyn DAO, which is looking to build like libraries, infrastructure that's based out of Bed-Stuy and other neighborhoods inside Brooklyn. And we've seen different waves. I won't spend too much time on this, but the DAO wave started from protocols like Uniswap. That is a DAO. It executes its activities as a DAO, but we'll see different waves over the next few years of how these DAOs are expanding outside of the builder kind of like an open source developer paradigm to different verticals that we are well familiar with, like venture capitalism, like freelancing, like gaming, right? So this is a breakdown from Deep DAO, which is a research DAO that does monitoring and understanding and research comprehension about how DAOs are being formulated and organized. So back in 2020, we had about 400 million across all DAOs in all asset treasuries, right? That is a capture from July 2022, where it's now at 10 billion. That's about 25x, right? And even last year, late last year, it was at 40x, right? So we can see that there is money that's, this actually rivals the music industry, which is at about 25 billion, right? And we could see that there's active voters who are like increasing the governance tokens that they're using to be able to construct decisions around how they want to execute on their organization moving forward is increasing as well over the next past 2 years.
It's also a time to market thing, right? Where, if you think about where we are, right, in terms of XRPL, where we are physically here today in terms of bringing amendments forward, and XLS20 being one of the amendments that we've brought forward. These are the things that we want to be able to do and start doing with DAOs as the market is growing with these types of exponential growth to make sure that we're ahead of the curve. So just wanted to make sure to drop that one in there as well.
So this is a great slide. We started with this conversation of virtual community, and this is a great take from a really great book called How to DAO that just recently got released last year. Communities, what they're really good at is that they have no barriers of entry, right? If I want to, start utilizing DALL-E to create some like AI generated picture, I could join a Discord, I could generate that using a trial, and release that image to do whatever I want, right? No barriers of entry. I could join the Discord. There's global access for it. The weakness is, and I won't go through all of the weaknesses and strengths, is that there's a slow decision making, right? How do you get a cohort or a Discord of 10,000 people, 100,000 people to be able to make decisions on how you want to move forward to provide the community that they're a part of? And there's also the lack of capital access. So how do you, in a regulated way, get individuals to buy into a digital asset or a digital treasury so that they can execute and expand or maybe innovate more on the services that they're providing? For the business association, so let's take that AI generated picture, DALL-E 2 example, and now we want to monetize the model. Let's say we have a proprietary model and we want to distribute it through a Discord, right? So we already know how to do that. We have B Corps, which is nonprofit, and C Corps, right? LLCs, 501c3s. So we have clear legal statuses on how to operate and abide by local law jurisdictions. And there's tons of templates of how to get started, how to create your own startup, and how to manage the different localizations of governance that are embedded into that decentralized autonomous organization or into this C Corp. The weaknesses really lay where, how do you get started, right? So you need articles of incorporation, you need legal expertise, you need bank accounts. There's also this idea of a top-down sort of unequal access to information. So how does someone who's really invested in the direction of a particular product able to communicate or impact the influence the direction that the organization is going? Then you have DAOs. So DAOs can be spun up in hours, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. You have ephemeral DAOs. They're great with achieving targeted goals. One example of that would be, let's say, the Constitution DAO, or there's a few DAOs that are looking to purchase NBA teams, right? There's transparency, which is the logging of the consensus-based voting process. There's no middle layer as well. So the good ideas that are coming from the ground up are rewarded based off of how they pass. And that's how you build the reputation of these members so that they can actually build their own, what we call guilds. And that's how you build your organic centralization within the DAO. What it lacks is that, it gets difficult to do proprietary code. How do you do data modes? How do you ensure that there's trade secrets? If anyone can join the DAO, let's say you have a membership process and you just pay to get in, or maybe you need to do an application process and you get voted on to get onboarded into the DAO. How do you conduct strategic decisions? This was the case when it came to the Constitution DAO, where they were outbid. So additional things that the decentralized autonomous organizations, they have chaotic work environments. They lack restraints of work hours on how to get processes done. There's a lot of volatility from the bottom up. And there's a concern about security. In the case of Badger DAO, the hackers were able to obtain access to the Badger app website and then inject malicious JavaScript code, which was able to gamify the DAO smart contracts to drain the treasury, right? So I'll move on to the next slide. Talk about just more issues with DAOs. So we summarized it just in the terms of 6. There's poor infrastructure. Managing DAOs are chaotic. Building consensus requires a lot of work, especially with large DAOs. Proposing mechanisms on how do we build decision-making and optimize costs for operation. So every transaction, if you're looking to do on-chain proposal mechanisms, this requires you to pay gas fees, right? Depending on the protocol or the ledger that you're on, right? There's also the legality discrepancy. So there's the new Wyoming new DAO law statute that has just recently been released recognizing decentralized autonomous organizations as limited liability corporations, which, Mark, you could add a little bit more context to that.
Yeah, absolutely. As localities or regions, kind of like the way that Wyoming has structured their DAO proposal, not only do you come underneath the structure of the legal entity, but they'll also provide you with, as you're seeing here, you say poor infrastructure as well. You get the coverage of the DAO as a legal entity. You get infrastructure. You get sandboxes. You get the ability to be within a secure environment. And just from a governance perspective, as you build this and you build these organizations, governance is key to making sure that you're not just looking at things from bottom up, that you're actually looking at it as well from top down. So we're talking about strategic objectives, your initiatives, right? And then getting into your proposals and how those initiatives actually get enacted, on the blockchain itself. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, just in terms of, not thinking about things from the ground up and building components in silos, but thinking about them holistically first, driving them with, actual business value and drivers that you can actually track in terms of KPIs as your DAO actually delivers on its initiatives, right? So your ability to do that and your ability to be successful, those two are directly correlated. Okay.
I want to touch on these last 3 points because they're pretty important. Navigating smart contracts. So when you deploy a DAO on chain, it's almost like deploying or launching a rocket, right? It's immutable. So how do you mitigate the risk of immutable code? In the case of Badger DAO, that was the case. Well, they went through kind of like a Web 2 interface to be able to inject into the lack of resilience that was the smart contract that was built into Badger DAO. So how do we navigate smart contracts to assure that the treasury is secure? There's also upfront costs and gas fees. Provisioning a DAO takes some change. And then also fiat off and on ramps, and there's volatility. How do we match voting tokens within the DAO to fiat currencies as well? There's additional problems around reputation.
5-minute check.
Yeah. There's additional problems around reputation without identity. So if you're joining a DAO, if this individual is working for a DAO, how do they get onboarded without checking the wallet for who's the ID that's associated with it? Realizing we have about 5 minutes. So I'll just breeze through this. So this is actually on-chain voting participation by DAO size. You can see the steep decrease once the DAO gets more than 25 to 100 people, or 25 to 100 wallets. So that's another problem. Like, how can you?
That's the 80-20 rule, right? So it's 20% of the people doing 80% of the work, and having to be able to understand where those synergies are. Like, how do you actually get the best out of the individuals who are actually doing the work? Right?
And there's also folks who are actually working full-time for DAOs now. So they're getting compensated. They're being able to provide payout mechanisms within the DAO. So the amount of work that you do, we call them bounties, that you're impacting on within the DAO, you could get compensated based off of the treasury and the decisions that are baked into it.
Yeah, so I know we have about 3 more minutes, but there's a lot of research that we've done. This is just an example coming from Solana, coming from squads. If you're on Solana, you could be using squads to build. I mean, Nate said earlier, right? For us to build out a couple of these DAOs, it took maybe like 10 to 15 minutes, but that's just because we had the components, right? And the components exist, and the idea is for us to, stir and give a call to action for those, like who put their hands up earlier. Like, we all know what DAOs are, but are we participating in DAOs? And this was one of the examples, right? And because this is a developer conference, I had to think about it like, yes, let me think about it in terms of the data itself, the domains, right? In terms of voting, the members, the membership, the vault itself, the treasury, management of the treasury. But then, like I was saying earlier, the idea is it's not just that we have the components to do it. It's that, are we actually driving this from like the top down in terms of like, how do we govern and manage all of these processes, right? Risk management is a key process as it relates to any of the initiatives that are going on inside of your proposals, any of the activities that are being done, funds that are being marshaled through the proposal itself. Like, how do we actually get in there and do those things, right? And make sure that we're managing some of the pieces that are key, which is collective custody, making sure that the fees on that particular blockchain are not the inhibitor, right? So as you go through Ethereum, right, these are examples from Ethereum. I think this is Alchemy and DAO Stack. But most of the times, as we went to the different blockchains and spun up what they have as DAOs, the biggest inhibitor, and what we don't want to be the biggest inhibitor, is cost, right? And that's one of the benefits as you look at it from a XRPL perspective, is that cost is not the inhibitor, right? The ability to implement what we've seen from a data and components and the primitives that it takes to run a governance process, that can be done with the capabilities that I can't say that we have currently, but when you look at side chains, when you look at Clio, that's coming from an architectural perspective to make sure that we're not hammering the main net, right? So off-chain processes, also hooks, right? All of these pieces that we have, including what we're talking about in terms of custody, they're going to assist us, as we kind of evangelize our process around bringing folks, into the space to say that, if we want to manage treasuries for these DAOs and manage them in a way that allows us to, implement the operating models of those DAOs, right? So even if it's a flat organization, you still have roles, you still have responsibilities, you still have actions that need to be taken. And all of those, as we go through here, they fall into these three main kind of like swim lanes, right? It's like, you got to understand the tokenomics, you got to understand the governance, the treasury itself, you got to manage all of those. And the idea is that it's better when we can put the automation in place to be able to deliver all of these versus, trying to do them disjointedly, which is kind of the way we have it right now in a lot of those platforms, right? You're able to do these actions, but they're actions that they're happening like in silos. And if we're building a platform for the future, then activities like this, as DAOs happen, and as the hacks happen, as Nate said earlier, they can't actually happen, discreetly and in silos. They actually have to happen with a generality across them. And we're proposing that generality is actually the governance layer that would give you the ability to execute on this. So
I'll talk through a few of the utilities really quickly. Like Coordinate is a tool that's being used for compensation. So it's like peer reward to each other. So if you get a task done, you could reward someone based off of the mechanisms that are embedded into the DAO. So that's under Treasury. Gnosis Vault is custodial vault for the Treasury. We're well familiar with it, but it provides multi-sig tooling, which saves DAO times on money as well. For tokenomics, how do we onboard individuals? Member admission, how do we define the voting rights? What about if someone has been a part of the DAO, how do we make it fair? Because they've accumulated so many voting tokens, maybe we can impose or invoke a quadratic voting, which actually requires them to put a cost up for the more voting tokens that they want to use for a particular proposal, right? And there's utilities that are being used right now, if you're familiar with Proof of Humanity, which is forensics on wallets, Proof of Attendance protocol, so making sure that the people are getting rewarded for the activity that they're doing. They're invoking, embedding into the decentralized autonomous organization through virtual Zooms or maybe in-person meetups.
Absolutely.
Yep, so we're just about out of time, but this is the punchline. So we just started to enable interoperability to allow the parallel between what other ledgers provide, right, through EVMs. So smart contract interoperability is being built through federated sidechains. There was a few talks this week through Mallorca, and that will be recorded, and also the documentations as well to check out. So how do we think about what the current status quo is when it comes to decentralized autonomous organizations, and how do we want to build it in the XRP ledger? And then also there's hooks, right? So hooks are a bit mutable. So how do we build something that is currently, there's been a proposed amendment for it. So hooks can handle no-code interfaces that we previously saw in those other examples through Aragon and DAOstack. Hooks are also limited to the 64 kilobyte memory that is required for them to be able to do the conditionals. But as we start to think about this, we want to make sure that we're having a conscious understanding of what is missing, where is the gap that are currently exists within decentralized autonomous organizations, and what we can build on the ledger. So I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.